It's time for the next part of the build, which is putting in the insulation and then flooring on top of that. So I'm starting by covering up all the holes with aluminum tape. That's important because any of these holes that I have, like this one or this one, are places where rust can come in, and if moisture can come through a hole, then rust will develop there. That's why most of the rust, that I found before was right around the holes. So I'm going to cover it up with this aluminum tape. People on the internet have talked about doing this or using sealant. I decided to do aluminum tape because I didn't think the sealant would stay in some of these holes very well. You can see there's just not a whole lot to bond to there, so I'm just going to go with the tape. The tape just has to stick to the inside, which should mean that it should be really fast and easy to do, and then I'm going to put down the foam. Also, it's important that you use aluminum tape for this because aluminum doesn't rust and steel will over time. So you don't want there's like copper tape, steel tape. You want to use aluminum for this part. So I've covered up all of the holes. There were a ton. I was pretty surprised at how many there were. I didn't even notice before. But they're all covered up to keep the moisture out. And now it's time to I put some of the seat brackets on. I'm going to put the front seat brackets back on. And then it's time to lay down the subfloor foam. The road noise is going to be a lot worse, at least for this first part of the video. I live on a corner, and unfortunately this day I was parked on the much busier street, so it's going to be a bit louder. I'm reattaching those seat brackets to the floor because I want to maintain the van's ability to move people. And for the seats to be safe, they have seat belts on them. For them to be safe, though, they have to be bolted directly to the frame of the car. You can't just screw them down to the plywood that you're putting, because in a crash that'll rip right out, and it's really dangerous, which is why I had to leave the brackets down. Then I'm going to build my floor around them to preserve the ability of the seats to be removed when I want them removed. So, quick discussion about how the floor works. It's really important to insulate your floor because it's a giant piece of sheet metal, and sheet metal conducts heat really effectively. So if you heat the inside of your van and don't insulate the floor, all the heat just conducts right out of the interior. And I ski a lot, and so if it's 13 degrees outside, I lost my voice yesterday. If it's 13 degrees outside, that's where all your heat's gonna go. So I'm using a nice 1-inch foam board insulation like you'd find in the wall of a house, and that's going underneath the plywood. But I'm a little bit concerned about the corrugations I have in my floor. So if you look at the floor, you see it's not flat. It has these valleys in it. And I'm going to fill those valleys with a special 1/4-inch foam that I got that's going to go in there. It's going to bring the whole thing up to flat. Also, the foam I'm using for filling those corrugations is a closed cell foam, which means that it's got these, the cells, it shouldn't absorb water, basically, because the cells are closed off to the outside and water can't percolate in. I think the brand name is Mini Cell, because the cells in the foam, the little pockets of air, are very, very small. Lots of people use this in their vans, and it should work well for me. So first, I use my calipers to measure the width of the valley. Turns out they're all pretty different, which is quite a pain. Then I mark out on the foam a strip the width of the valley I need to fill, and use my straight edge, which is a piece of old scrap lumber, to draw a straight line. This doesn't really need to be that exact. Then finally I come through and cut it with kitchen scissors. So now that I cut that stuff, I'm going to glue it down. I'm using this 3M90 high strength spray adhesive, which is interesting because I'm in California, and in California it's becoming increasingly hard to find certain products, like a lot of 3M products actually. But this one specifically, they're not selling it here anymore. I think it has to do with Prop 65. But I found a place in LA that sells it. I rambled on about adhesive for a while, so I cut the rest of that. Here it is when I'm using it. I'm overspraying here a little bit. This was actually my first attempt, but you get the idea. Spray it down. You actually wait for a little bit until it gets tacky, and then you can put your foam down. This is what that looked like. I would either walk or crawl on it to get it to stick down all the way. and make sure it was really on there. I finished putting in all the 1/4-inch foam, and now it looks like this. So you can see all those gaps and little valleys have been filled up, and now there's a nice flat layer on which to lay the insulation board. So this is the next thing I need to lie down. It's a foam insulation board, and it's 1 inch thick, which means it has an R value of 6. The R value has to do with how well it resists transmission of heat. Higher is better. The next thing I need to do is start measuring out these pieces. I'm going to cut foam board pieces that go around these brackets, as I said, so I can keep them in, and they'll fill all the way around. So I don't have sawhorses, and I've just used some 4x4 scrap on the ground to cut my foam insulation board. I'm gonna mark out my rectangle that I need to cut, and I'm gonna cut it with my jigsaw that I actually bought for this project. And I only need it for the plywood, but it'll make this a lot easier. You measure a few times like this to make sure you get a nice parallel line for your cut. Then I measure the other side, and then I cut it with the jigsaw, and the jigsaw makes really short work of this soft foam board. Here I'm marking and then cutting out those little cutouts for the seat brackets. This is easily the biggest pain in the butt of this part, but you won't have to do this unless you're keeping the seats in like I am. Here I'm laying down the adhesive that connects the lower layer to this foam board. For this part I used Silicone 2 by General Electric. It comes out of a caulking gun. You can get it at Home Depot. So I'm all done with laying the insulation board. It fills up the entire back of the van. The brackets come through, and next it's time to put plywood on top of this. Fucking dope. Seems to be on there pretty fucking well. The process of cutting the plywood is almost identical to cutting the foam board, except obviously you have to go a bit slower because it takes a longer time to cut through this material. One nice thing about the jigsaw is you can make a hole in the middle of the panel without having to come in from the side by drilling a hole with a drill, poking the little saw blade through, and cutting around in the shape you need, which I had to do for my brackets. The cutting of these little holes, especially for the floor brackets, is really a long, arduous process because I don't want to mark them all out, cut them all, and find out that I'm off on all of them by a little bit. So I kind of cut 1 or 2 at a time, take the wood out, double check that they're correct, put it back in, cut some more, and so it takes a really long time to do. So one thing you'll notice that I'm not doing is framing my floor. And what I mean by that is I don't have any wood, like 2x4s or something, under here that the plywood is going to be screwed to. I'm doing that for a couple reasons. First of all, when you screw holes in the bottom of your van, those are just more holes, as I talked about, where rust can come through, and it will come through eventually. You're just putting a bunch of holes in the bottom. Also is because it's not necessary. The foam has a compressive strength of 20 psi, so I can push on it with 20 pounds per square inch of force without it giving way. And especially with plywood over the top of that, my weight is substantially spread out, and so none of this is going to be really pushed on that hard. So I woke up today and I'm sick again, but I really need to finish this floor. It's killing me, and I really want it to be done, so I'm going to cut the last piece for it. When you have nice straight cuts on a piece, you can just use a circular saw, which is way faster. It's one of my 5 key tools, I think, that everybody should own for projects like this. Those are the circular saw, the jigsaw, the drill, the angle grinder, and the sander. Those 5 tools will get you through 99% of anything you'll ever have to do, and they make your life so much easier that I think owning them is totally worth it. None of my tools have batteries, so I never have to worry about the batteries dying. Also, I love that they're all matching Makita brand. They look so pretty. Here's the last piece going in. It fit properly, which was nice because I felt absolutely terrible by this point. Putting the adhesive down for the plywood was the exact same as doing the silicone. Still comes out of a caulking gun. I used PL300, which is Loctite brand foam board adhesive. So it turned out that when I said I was sick yesterday, I was really sick. I got really feverish and then had to sleep for 13 hours. But the glue has been down all day under the plywood, and I had a bunch of weights on top of it. But I think we may have had a problem with warping, so we're gonna go take a look. So here's how I had the weights down. You can see I've got them on the corners here, mostly around this big piece, and I'm worried about warping on this big piece with all the cutouts that I made. You can see it's, maybe not there, not that obvious, but I think I'm gonna end up having to put screws, maybe just a couple screws around the edges of a couple of the big pieces to make sure that I don't have kind of a smushy floor as the plywood bends under your feet. So with regards to the warping, you can see that I've got a ledge here, big ledge here. You can see this wood is lifted up like that, there, and there too. And pretty big warp here and over here. So I don't see really any way around this except to put some screws in. I got 20 of these stainless steel screws. They have a countersunk head, so this part will lay flat on the plywood, and this part they're self-drilling, so it'll drill through the bottom easily, and this will protrude out the bottom, which sucks, but I'll cover it with some kind of sealant. Hopefully it'll be okay. All right. At least I can fucking walk on the floor now. I put in screws around the corners of the panels where they were most crucial to prevent warping. As I said, I'm really not happy about this because it invites the possibility of rust getting into my floor that I worked so hard on, but I really didn't feel like I had a choice. I will be putting sealant on the bottom of the van where the screws protrude to hopefully prevent rust from coming in. I think that's the best I can do. Also, the screws are made of stainless steel themselves, so they shouldn't rust. So I'm done with my floor. Check it out. I built this little step here out of some scrap plywood to fill in that area. You can see the seats are in, the plywood is in, the warping has been dealt with there, and it goes all the way to the back. Here's what it looks like from the back. Again, you can see this is nice and flat now, and everything works. Gonna call this part done. One thing you might have noticed is that I'm not putting in the vinyl flooring over the top of the plywood yet. I was told not to do that because I'll scuff it up while I'm putting in the walls and ceiling of the van, and so I should do that right at the end so that it stays nice and smooth. So I'm going to be done with the floor until the end of the build.